Mouseberg, a city that smells like cheese and broken promises. You've got the cheese leggers running the docks, the BMP Big Mouse Party, marching through streets that used to belong to everyone, one bad election away from making certain people disappear, quietly, permanently. Cops taking cuts from both sides and sleeping fine. And somewhere underneath all of that, beneath the jazz and the graft, a cult trying to punch a hole through to the other side of reality, which is frankly above my pay grade. It's a normal Tuesday. What's less normal is a magician, Steve Bandel, disappeared mid-show right in front of a full house, which would have been impressive if he'd meant to do it. He didn't. Left behind mob connections, a secret lab, and more questions than my caseboard has wall space. My name is Jack Pepper, private investigator, former soldier, and this is my city. Okay, it's not. I wish it was. I'm sitting in a chair in Wales and I haven't moved in 4 hours, but for a second there, you felt it too, right? But before we go any further, this video is sponsored by Mouse PI for Hire. The link is in the description. But most importantly, welcome to the city that never sleeps because of too much cheese. Welcome to Mouse.
Something within me, I don't know, old instinct maybe, said turn back.
Some solid evidence, and we'll get to the bottom of this in no time.
Tammy, ain't you a sight for sore eyes?
Don't go count your mice just yet! They're coming! Just shut up and keep firing!
This case was more trouble than it was worth.
Jack!
But, well, trouble is what I do.
Developed by Fumi Games, published by PlaySide Studios, it is a 1930s rubber hose animation noir boomer shooter. Troy Baker is in it, and he's clearly having the time of his life.
Crooks beware! Detective Pepper's in the house.
A guy dies by being dissolved with paint thinner, yelling "Gabagoo" as he dissolves into a puddle on the floor. You pull out a big cannon and turn 3 enemies into an ash pile. You can even just sock them with your gorgeously animated fists if you want to. But usually this is the part where I start bracing myself, because you know how this normally goes. Something blows up because of how it looks. Genuinely, it can actually look incredible like this thing did. And then you sit down with it and the gameplay is fine, serviceable. The aesthetic is doing the heavy lifting while the game underneath it shuffles around hoping you didn't notice. I've played enough of these to have developed a kind of trust issue about stylish indie games. My arms were crossed, ready to appreciate it at a polite distance and move on. I was wrong. What followed was, honestly, one of the most fun boomer shooters I've ever played. And then you boot it up, and Jack Pepper hums to himself. Just a little tune on the loading screen. It's not prompted nor announced. It's just there. And it's such a small thing, but it immediately tells you something important about what kind of game this is. The character exists when you're not looking. The world seems to have a pulse. Someone at Fumi cared enough to put a hum on a loading screen. And if that wasn't enough, the game opens on a Zeppelin, like all early 20th century media should, as far as I'm concerned. A little off topic, but honestly, Zeppelins are so fucking cool. Why aren't they around anymore? Anyway, you are pursuing the leader of the BMP, the Big Mouse Party, as I said previously, for a blimp while fighting his goons. Which functions as a tutorial but doesn't feel like one because you're too busy shooting fascist mice off a flying airship to notice that it's teaching you things, apart from the tutorial stuff. But eventually the leader makes a run for it, at which point Jack comments, and I'm paraphrasing, that the man has surprisingly good stamina for a politician.
Guy's got stamina, I'll give him that.
Which is the moment I decided I like Jack Pepper as a character. He's got opinions, and often he's not afraid to share them. This time, specifically about cardio. He's my kind of person. But eventually, you get trapped, dropped from the blimp like an anvil or a piano in an old cartoon, and it cuts to black. Then the first monologue hits, Jack setting up the real story, the magician, the city, all of it.
Some falls don't begin in the sky. They begin in quiet rooms, with friendly voices and fondue bottles. Mine started a few weeks back. The sky was just the exit wound. It began with a call. Routine. Familiar. Wanda from the Mouseberg Herald. Usually she swings by the office with a lead. If it pans out, she hears it first. Simple, really. She gets her story, I get a few bucks to stockpile cheese, and for a moment, Mouseberg gets to breathe easy. But that day was different. She was tight-lipped. Meat on sight, details later. Had to be someone big. Recognizable. The kind that only says, oops, when they remember they're mortal too. Something within me, old instinct maybe, said turn back. Let this one go. That this case was more trouble than it was worth. But, well, trouble is what I do.
And the game takes you back to the beginning. In media res, done properly. You've had the hook, now earn it. I was mostly wrong about this game. Let me explain why. But first, to properly understand why Mouse PI looks the way it does, you need to understand what Fumi Games actually is. Because this is not a game studio that decided rubber hose animation would be a cool aesthetic choice, although it certainly is. Fumi is a Polish studio that, before any of this, was an animation studio. That was the whole company, they made cartoons. But then COVID happened, and the Polish animation industry largely fell apart. The contracts got cancelled, work dried up, generally stuff that happens during a worldwide pandemic, and the CEO made the call to take everything they knew and pivot into games. 1/3 of the studio is dedicated purely to animation. Not gameplay, not level design, animation. Because for Fumi, it isn't a department that supports the game, it's the foundation that the game was built on top of. And it shines through every facet of the game. Then, one of the devs posted a clip on TikTok, and it blew up. 1.3 million wishlists, tens of millions of views. A publishing deal materializing out of nowhere. A game that barely existed suddenly had an audience it needed to deliver for. Enormous pressure to put on a small studio that started as an animation company because a pandemic destroyed their industry. But it turns out, they were ready for it. And just a quick warning, there will be some very minor spoilers ahead, but nothing insane. You play as Jack Pepper, voiced by Troy Baker, who sounds like he was born to do this, and clearly had a great time doing it. A former World War I soldier turned private investigator. He has PTSD, a seemingly infinite space for weaponry, and an undying need to get to the bottom of any mystery presented to him. Which, when a simple disappearance turns into a city-spanning conspiracy that ties together the seedy underbelly of this bustling metropolis, it certainly comes in handy, even to his own detriment. You get around the city and surrounding areas via an overworld you drive through, which is immediately the correct decision. Mouseberg has a hub that features Jack Pepper's office, a pub full of locals, and Tammy's workshop. Tammy is basically Jack's sidekick, an orphan mouse who Jack helped put her father away, but it's not as bad as it sounds, who handles upgrades and absolutely cannot stop herself from roasting Jack every single time he walks through the door. It starts to feel like a war crime at some points, the poor guy. The devs described her as Jack's Q, as in James Bond's Q, although not quite an old woman or the young one or whatever version of Q you think of. She is chaotic, warm, and is the reason you actually look forward to coming back between cases rather than just mashing through the hub to get back to the shooting. The structure is mostly case-based. You go out, fight through a district, gather as many clues as you can find, which, if you're me and have the perception of a housefly, wasn't a lot. You come back, pin everything to a caseboard, until the office starts to look like that one bit from Always Sunny, and it helps build that satisfaction of watching a picture emerge from chaos, threads connecting, and something bigger, eventually, slowly coming into focus. You see as the case goes from merely investigating the disappearance of one of your war buddies, a magician, but I can't get too far into that, but trust me, it is very interesting, as it twists and convulses into a massive case featuring all the factions of the city's underbelly. The mob, the corrupt police force, the BMP, the Big Mouse Party, might makes right types, the not-so-subtle authoritarian party that is very reminiscent of a certain party that developed in the 1920s and 30s. But the point is, watching the entire case unravel through these seemingly isolated incidents is genuinely engaging in a way that I didn't quite think it would be. And to be honest, the story does go to places that I also wasn't expecting. For a game with such a charming exterior, there's actual depth here. The corruption runs extremely deep, and the city has history. And even the NPCs have opinions and grievances that you can just hear as you walk through the streets. And underneath all of the jazz and the bouncy cartoon chaos, there's something genuinely dark holding the whole thing up. Like, for example, the BMP are gaining ground, the cops are crooked, and in Clergy Row, one of the game's most blunt moments, you turn up to find the police rounding up shrews. Shrews are the second-class citizens of Mouseberg, treated as lesser by the BMP specifically because they're small, because they don't fit the image of what the party thinks a proper citizen looks like. In Clergy Row, they're being beaten and arrested in a slum while you photograph it for evidence. The commentary writes itself. The game knows it and doesn't dress it up. It's cliché, sure, but it's cliché in the way that noir is always cliché. The tropes are kind of the point. Whilst tropes or clichés normally drag down the experience for me, I found myself actively enjoying them. The over-the-topness inherent to the noir genre honestly made me smile at so many points in the story. The game understands that and commits completely, which means when it actually lands something heavy, it earns it. There's a photo you can find in-game. 3 guys, young, or younger anyway, standing together somewhere that looks like a war zone based off their uniforms, and they have fake smiles on their faces. Jack is in it, Steve Bandel is in it, and Cornelius, a mayoral candidate, old friend, the kind of man who went into politics after the war, probably because the war convinced him that someone should, is in it. 3 veterans, 3 people who made it back from something that most people didn't. The photo just sits there eventually on your caseboard. It doesn't get a cutscene. It does get somewhat of a monologue about it.
Must be from the end of our tour. You know, it almost looks like we meant those smiles.
But largely, it's just there, in the background, while you pin things to the caseboard and talk to Tammy and come and go. And somehow that's more effective than if it had been announced or fully addressed. You notice it, you remember it, and then when you're 3 cases deep into trying to find out what happened to Bandel, you look at it differently. Because the missing magician is Jack's friend, not a client, not a stranger, someone he survived the war with, and the game doesn't overplay this. It's not constantly waving it at you. Jack isn't having emotional breakdowns about it. But he's doing his job because doing his job is how Jack processes things. But it's underneath everything. The reason he's still looking when most PIs would have taken the money and moved on. Because Bandel did disappear mid-show, front of a full house, mid-act, and then just gone. Which would have been an impressive trick if he meant to do it. He didn't. What he left behind was a paper trail that branches in 3 directions at once. Mob debts, BMP interest, and a secret lab under the city that nobody was supposed to know about. That lab is one of your first real destinations. You go down there early and what you find is Robo Betty, or rather 3 of her. Betty was Bandel's old assistant and she's dead. And Bandel built robots in her image, which is a sentence that tells you a lot about what kind of man he is, but we'll get to that. There's 3 mini-bosses, each escalating on the last. The first one uses beams to attack you, the other runs at you with knives, and the third kinda combines it all together. It is tidy, well-structured, and the detail of them all being modeled on the same dead woman sits in the back of your head the entire time you're fighting them. But the lab also gives you the first hints about the shrews.
I see there's been some weird
Disinfectants? No way. They finally came up with something better than Spike D's stuff.
disappearances, Jack.
The notes and clues you find in Bandel's lab start to sketch an outline of why, and the outline is not a good one. You'll find out later, which I won't get too into depth, but he was experimenting with ink. In Mouseberg, ink is the lifeblood of the world, which makes sense when you think about it. These are cartoon characters, they are literally made of the stuff. It is what gives them form and substance and the ability to exist at all. And Bandel had found a use for it that required a large supply, the kind of supply you can't get from a shop, the kind you have to take from people. The operation running underneath Mouseberg, supported simultaneously by the BMP, the mob, the cheeseleggers, the corrupt police, is trafficking shrews. The people with the least power, the ones the system has already decided don't count, are being taken and used as a resource. I won't say any more, you should experience it for yourself, but it is quite an interesting storyline. But running parallel to all of this is a different investigation, kind of, tangentially linked. A madame shows up at the office, a French accent, very committed to it, not actually French.
Monsieur Jacques.
Just thinks it's exotic, which is the kind of character detail that tells you the writers were definitely having a good time. But she asked Jack to find out who killed her friend. But the friend was Bandel's ex-assistant. You investigate, you follow the thread, and you land on a suspect. You tell her, and I'm not gonna elaborate any further, but it doesn't end well for the guy. And that's about all of the main story that I'm willing to cover. You should really just go experience it for yourself. It's cliché, sure, but cliché in a good way. And now we move on to the animation. Rubber hose animation, a quick primer, is the style that dominated cartoons in the 1920s and 30s. Named for the way limbs moved, like rubber tubes with no rigid joints. Everything fluid and stretchy and slightly wrong in a way that's deeply charming. Fleischer Studios, Betty Boop. It has rules, internal logic, a vocabulary for how impacts register, how weight behaves in a world that doesn't have any. How a character communicates emotion when they're made of bouncing lines. Get it wrong and it looks cheap. Get it right and it looks alive. Fumi gets it right. Every enemy death is a tiny choreographed performance. They don't just fall over, they do something, a specific something, a reaction that has character, a last moment that tells you something about who they were before you shot them. Weapons flop around with that rubbery weightlessness that shouldn't work in a first-person shooter, and completely does because the world around you is following the same physical rules. Everything moves together, and it comes together to make it seem like the whole game has a pulse. The enemy voice lines also deserve their own mention because they are one of the best things in the game and they are objectively not that great. They're camp and they're cliché, delivered with total commitment to a kind of henchman speak that barely makes grammatical sense. Guys going down mid-fight saying things that have no business being as funny as they are, because the writing understands that the joke isn't the line itself, it's the absolute sincerity with which it's delivered. You will kill people specifically to hear what they say on the way down. I did this constantly and it is a completely valid playstyle. But the sound design is doing serious work alongside all of this. Big band jazz that never really stops, original compositions that shift in tone as the levels do, even a track from Caravan Palace, the electro swing lot, that lands at exactly the right moment in exactly the right way. And the sound effects themselves are in rhythm with the animation. The way a gun sounds when it fires, the way a hit registers, the way an enemy reacts, it's all part of the same vocabulary. Nothing sounds dropped in from somewhere else, everything is diegetic and belongs. And trust me, the game does things with the black and white palette that I didn't think it would later on, and it is really cool. Now, the shooting can be flat. It's not broken, not bad. It just depends how you play it. And even if you play it like a pensioner, it's still functional. It does what it needs to do, and not much more than that. And look, that's almost a genre requirement. This is a boomer shooter, but some boomer shooters make the shooting feel genuinely incredible, and this one does do that with a lot of the weapons. It's just very dependent on how you play. But that said, the shotgun is outstanding. The Tommy gun equivalent is outstanding. These two specifically have a weight and a feedback that the rest of the arsenal, whilst it does possess, I found these to be the standouts. The shotgun in particular hits the way a shotgun should hit. The sound is right, the knockback is right, the way enemies react to it is right. They get stunned if you shoot them close enough and they don't die. I defaulted to both of these for the entire back half of the game and felt completely fine about that decision. If you play this and you're not using the shotgun, I genuinely don't know what to tell you. But while I found these the most mechanically satisfying, the rest of the weapons are where the game's personality comes through, most clearly. The devarnisher slowly poisons enemies until their flesh literally melts off their skeleton. It makes sense, as devarnish literally melts them. Someone at Fumi sat down and thought about the internal logic of the world and then made a weapon out of it, which is the kind of design decision that makes you trust a developmental team. There's also a bone chainsaw, which is just great. You just run up to people and just... and then you can also like chuck bones at them. It's fucking great. Someone at Fumi came in the morning and was like, what is this game lacking? A bone chainsaw, and kept it. Enormous respect for that. You can also just punch people or kick people. The game fully supports this as a viable combat strategy. You can upgrade your punches, and I used it more than I probably should have, and I have no regrets about it whatsoever. Investigation is the other half of the gameplay loop, and it's underrated as a mechanic. You have a camera and you can photograph certain things for evidence. Crime scenes, suspicious activity, things that shouldn't be where they are. And the photography feeds into the caseboard back at the hub, which means you're constantly doing two things simultaneously.
fighting your way through a level with one part of your brain and paying attention to what the level is telling you with the other. It makes the districts feel like actual places rather than just combat arenas with scenery. You're not just clearing rooms, you're building a picture of what happened at the different regions that you go to. But the secret hunting slots into this perfectly. In any other FPS, poking every wall feels weird, suspicious, like you're breaking some unspoken contract with the level design. In Mouse PI, it's kinda your job. You are a detective, you're supposed to be looking in corners. The game gives you permission to be nosy and pays you out with extra story. Bonus context, hidden comics tucked behind safes you crack with your tail. Your tail, that's the lockpicking mechanic. You trip the tumblers with your mouse tail, and I think about it quite a lot. Upgrades are sort of quietly good. They're not flashy, there's not a whole skill tree with 18 branches and a currency system. Well, there is, you need schematics to unlock them, but you know what I mean. Just straightforward improvements that actually change how you play. You can make your pistol fire 3 rapid shots per trigger pull instead of 1. It doesn't just change a number, it changes how you think about engagement. The pistol goes from somewhat of a pea shooter to an actual competent weapon. The shotgun upgrade lets you blast through multiple lined up enemies, changes how you think about their positioning. You feel the guns, they matter. The kind of system that improves a game without ever announcing that it's doing so. But movement is where it opens up properly. You start grounded, a standard FPS, there's nothing special, and then you start unlocking things. The grapple hook, which is your tail because, of course it is. You are a mouse and this is consistent with the world. You unlock wall running, clambering up surfaces. And somewhere in the back half of the game when you've got everything and you're chaining it through an encounter, it genuinely clicks into something. Swing in on the tail, wall run across a gap, drop on something's head. Shotgun 2 more things on the way down. It's not ultra kill, it's not going to rewire your understanding of what a first-person shooter can be, but it's fun. Consistently, genuinely fun, in a way that the base gameplay alone doesn't quite reach. There are 2 wall run sections in the game. I don't know if it was just my version of it, but they were specific puzzly, timing-dependent wall run sections where the geometry asks something of you that the rest of the game never does, and quite frankly has no business doing. I want to be very clear and very measured about this. It nearly broke me. The angle windows were so unforgiving. You hit the wall and your character either catches or doesn't, and there is no discernible physical reason why it goes one way or the other. But I got through both of them, that's all I'll say. But talk about the gameplay as much as we want. We need to talk about the set pieces. Mouseberg's districts are varied enough that they're never really looking at the same space twice. There's dark streets, sewers, swamps, opera houses, entire cities below the streets. Film studios. Each one has its own distinct texture, a personality, a reason to exist beyond just being the next level. Each one is loaded with things to find it if you bother looking, like the secrets we just talked about, and it expands the world in directions the main story doesn't always have time to go. But the environments also do something quite smart, which is that they never let you forget what Mouseberg actually is underneath the jazz. Clergy Row is the most explicit example. We already talked about it, but you arrive to find the police rounding up and beating shrews in a slum. And you photograph it because that's the mechanic. That's how evidence works in this game. You stand there with your camera and you document what's happening. It's not subtle, but I don't think it's trying to be. The commentary is right there on the surface, and the game just lets it sit. It doesn't undercut it with a joke, it doesn't rush past it. You just click, an evidence, and onto the caseboard it goes. But the boss fights are each doing something different from the last. The Opera House is the first major one. You are fighting a large lady in a grand ornate theatre that's on fire and she's singing during the fight. Actively singing. It's part of the encounter because it's a game that commits fully to every bit it sets up and does not flinch. You're dodging her attacks while the environment escalates around you, as it burns around you, the set piece building and building until the opera house itself is part of what's happening. Stuff collapses from the ceiling as the opera house burns more. The shift in the environment is the kind of moment you describe to someone who hasn't played it and watch their face try to process all the information simultaneously. In a game that's partly about the gap between how Mouseberg presents itself and what's actually happening underneath. Mouse PI for Hire is exactly what it looks like. A 1930s cartoon noir boomer shooter where you dissolve gangsters with paint thinner and crack safes with your actual mouse tail and fight a large lady in a burning opera house and photograph police brutality for your caseboard and give a kid some balloons. Because what else are you gonna do? It commits to the aesthetic, to the tone, to every single bit it sets up. It doesn't hedge, it doesn't apologize for what it is. It doesn't quietly sand down its own edges in case someone finds the darkness uncomfortable or the slapstick too silly or the political subtext too on the nose. It just is what it is, all the way. And I think that's rarer than it should be. In 2026, when everything is trying to be three things at once and hedging its bets on all of them in case one doesn't land, there is something genuinely refreshing about a game that sat down, decided what it was, and then went and was exactly that. A Polish animation studio that COVID forced into games made a 1930s cartoon boomer shooter about fascism and ink trafficking and a detective who cracks safes with his tail, and they made it with so much craft and care and commitment that the thing that should have been a novelty is actually just good. A good game. A game worth your time. Jack Pepper hums to himself while you wait for things to load. That's the whole thing, really. That's what you need to know. It's £25 on Steam, PS5, Xbox X/S, Switch 2, PC. The link is in the description, and it's pinned in the comments. You should find the turpentine gun and use it on everyone. Alright, well, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. Honestly, I don't know if you can tell, I actually really like this game. It is a really good game. I quite enjoyed it. Thank you so much to Fumi Games and everyone for supporting the video, for sponsoring me, for trusting me to cover this properly. I really, really appreciate it. Like, genuinely, I don't even have the words, but this was great. I loved covering this so much. But yeah, there's not much else I can say. Go play the game. It's not that much. It deserves every penny. The soundtrack slaps, the gameplay's fun, the story's fun. It's just a fun game. It's just, I love it. Anyway, as always, thank you so much to the channel members and the Patreons. That, of course, being Flapjack, 8th Heretic, Vested Voice, Pewter Hailstorm, Will Provid, Rastolki Ryla, My Horror Project, Idenios, Keother, Andrew Sherman, Shaddix, Norica, Sign Up King 5000, Sisyphus, Reeslun, Ellie Kitty, Aroxano, A Brick Wall, Ash Crowing, Crit Croc, Proxy EDM, Sign Up King, The Radiant Opera, Bearpaw, Ice Bear Ray, Vibe Cato, and Adrian Lynch. Thank you all so much for the support. It truly means the world to me. And yes, not much more to say. If you want your name read out at the end, go become a channel member or join the Patreon. And yes, go play Mouse PI. Thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Bye bye.